Hey everyone, Nick Decord here from Kodak Games. In this video, we're going to cover how to make a family of throwable items, each with their own unique effect, and we're going to learn how to control it all using a single component that we add to our character. So since it is Valentine's Day, I thought it'd be fun to do something themed around that. So the first thing we're going to learn how to make is the love bomb. So this little smoke bomb that you throw out and it creates this big cloud of pink smoke. And if there are any enemies caught in it, then it sends out these little seekers towards them and stuns them for a few seconds because they're love struck. So that should be pretty fun to make. But then after that, we'll do one that's more traditional, just an explosive throwable that explodes on impact. And then lastly, we will make one that spawns lightning and electrocutes any enemies that are caught nearby. So with that all being said, let's get started. Alright, so we're in the first person template here. I do already have a throwables tutorial folder set up here with some art assets already imported in. And I'll touch on each of these as I get to them. And I also imported some of the third person blueprint characters in here to kind of use as targets. So first thing we'll do is create a new folder here called Blueprints. And in here we'll start making that parent class horror throwables. We use actor as the base class. We'll call that BP throwable parent. So in here we're going to start laying down the framework for all our children classes. The first thing we'll add in is a sphere collision. Call this Throwable Collider. And we'll make that the new root component. We'll add in a couple static mesh components. Call this Shell. And another one called Icon. And the reason I'm doing this is because all of my throwable items, they have a spherical shell. And because of that, I can use this base spherical shape here to do all the collision settings or the collision detection, which is just a little easier for the engine. If that's not the case for you, you can obviously get rid of this and just use the shell for the collision. It really just depends on your project. With that being said, we're going to set the collision for this to overlap only pawn. And for the shell and the icon, we're going to give it no collision at all. And also no overlap events. Now we can add in the shell mesh, which is just one of the static meshes I had imported previously. The collider, we want to set its radius down to 5. And we'll focus in on that and we'll scale up the shell to match that sphere. One more thing we're going to add in here is a projectile movement component. We'll call that throwable movement. And a couple important settings we want to change in there is we want to uncheck initial velocity and local space, and we also want to uncheck auto activate. So we'll come back to this later, but that's all we really need for now to start building our component. So in here, we'll right click again, create a new blueprint class, but this time we'll do scene component. We'll call this BPC underscore throwable. And in here, we're going to add a couple, or we're going to delete this, then we're going to add a couple custom events. First one's going to be called Ready Throwable. And the second one will be called Throw Throwable. And this is what's going to handle readying the throwable, getting ready to throw, and then actually throwing it. We'll compile that. We're going to add some variables in here. We want to create a current throwable variable. And this is going to have the object type of our parent throwable. We're going to add an array for the types of throwables. We just need to change that to an array. And we're going to be using our characters mesh in here a lot, so I'm actually going to make another variable called character mesh. And we'll change that to a skeletal mesh component type. And we'll change that back to just a singular variable and compile. So when we ready the throwable, what we really want to do is spawn in one of our throwable items. So we'll do a spawn actor from class. And for the class, we'll grab our possible throwable types. And for now, we'll just get a copy at the 0 index. To set that, we'll compile, choose this, and we'll add in that parent class for now. And plug that in here. For our transform, we want that to be the same transform as the component that we're in now. So we're just going to do get world transform and plug that in there. We'll connect that there. Once we spawn in this throwable, we do want to go ahead and set our current throwable be whatever just spawned in. And then to actually throw the throwable, what we want to do is we want to get our current throwable, get its throwable movement. This is the projectile movement component that we made. And what we want to do is we want to set the velocity of this. Now to create the velocity though, we are going to get our player controller. We're going to call it get actor forward vector off of that. We're going to use this as the direction. Then for the speed, I'm actually going to go back into the parent, make one more variable here. We're going to just call this throw speed. Make it a float type. We can set that by default to be something like 2000. Now our throwable, we can get that variable off of this. We can multiply those two together to get our velocity. Now once we set the velocity, one more thing we want to do is actually activate our throwable movement. And we'll connect all these together. Now once we have this together, we'll jump into our first person character blueprint. And in our event graph, we'll go ahead and add that throwable component in here. We'll just leave it called that for now. You can change this to whatever you want though. And we'll parent it to the first person camera. In our viewport, we can move this around to just kind of be right up here in front of our camera. Something like that. And then in our event graph, we're going to get a keyboard event. I'm going to use the E key, but you can really set this to whatever you want to use. And then when we press the E key, what we want to do is we want to get our throwable component, and we want to call that ready throwable event. And then once we release the E key, we'll want to call that throw throwable. And one more thing, we also want to set the character mesh variable that we made in our component to be the character mesh for our first person character. We'll call set character mesh, and we'll pull in this here and connect those together. Now with this all set up, we can go ahead and test it out real quick. So it mostly works, we just need to attach it to our character. So in our component, once we spawn this in, we want to attach this actor to a component. And the component that we want to attach it to is actually the component that we're in now. So we'll get a reference to self, socket that in there, and we'll choose snap to target for all of these. We'll try again. There we go. Now we can go ahead and create an animation montage and start using that in conjunction with this component. So back in our content browser, I'm going to go to our animations folder here. We're going to be using these two animations here for our montage. I'll just right click, create animation montage. We'll use the arm skeleton, and we'll call this montage underscore throwable. And in here, we're going to go over to our asset browser. We're going to pull in the ready animation and the throw animation. Now, if we preview that, we'll sit there in ready and then go straight to throw. So we're going to change that. We're also going to add in a couple sections here. We're going to call this one ready, and we're going to call this one throw. We're going to line these up with the animation tracks. We can delete this default one. Now over here in our montage sections, we're going to click on this arrow and we're going to select ready down here, and that tells it to loop through the ready section here. And what we're also going to do is we're going to change the group and slot for this. in our slot manager. If this isn't here, you can get it from the window drop down. You can click on this right here and it'll pop up. This one's already in here, but if you need to make a new one, you can just click add group and then add slot. And this is just a way to organize your animations. So for me, I want to create this group of throwables animations, and since this animation, or this slot I should say, is for readying the throwable in front of the character, I just called it front. So if you're making animations to ready it to the side of the character, you could create a new slot, call it side, and play that animation there instead. We'll change this slot name here to throwables.front. And we will refresh this. So we're going to add a couple more things in here. I'm going to make a new animation notify. I'm going to call this throwable start. We're going to bring this all the way to the front, and one more all the way at the end here. And then one more notify. We'll go ahead and create a new track here. So for this one, we want to jump to our throw animation. We want to get it like right towards the end. Not all the way at the end, but like right about there. So in this new track, we'll go ahead and add a new notify. We'll choose montage notify this time. And for this one, we'll click on it and go into details, and we'll change the name to end of throw. And basically, these two notifies here are going to talk to our animation blueprint, and this notify here is going to be something that we can use in our component. And this is what's going to be what tells us to actually throw the throwable. So go ahead and save this and jump back into our component. Now after we spawn the actor in here, what we want to do is we want to play a montage. And for the skeletal mesh component, we're going to grab our character mesh variable. And for the montage, we're going to choose that throwable. And we're just going to go ahead and set this starting section to ready. You could leave that as none since ready is the first section, but I'm doing that just for posterity. And then for our throwable event, what we actually want to do, instead of this, we're going to drag this over, and we want this to actually fire once we hit that montage notify. So we're going to play the montage first here. And again, we need our character mesh. And choose throwable. But this time we want the starting section to be that throw section. We'll drag this out a little bit, get some more room. And now off this on notify begin branch, what we're going to do is call switch on name. And we're going to plug in the notify name in the selection there. And we'll add a pin for that end of throw notify. And so now if we hit that notify and it is that end of throw, we'll go ahead and call in this this chunk of code here and compile. Now in order to actually play the animations though, we need to go into our first person animation blueprint. And we need to blend in that slot from the montage. So we'll go into our animation graph. We're going to disconnect this and we're going to cache this pose here. And we're going to call this just locomotion. And down here, we're going to do a layered blend per bone. For the base pose, we're going to call in this locomotion cache. And then for the blended pose, we're going to use this again, but this time we're going to blend in whatever plays from that slot that we made for our throwables. Now whenever we send this blend weight to 1, it will blend in whatever is happening here. But one more thing we need to do is under branch filters here, we need to add a new element. And for the bone name, we need to call in the clavicle, the left clavicle. And basically this filters it so that only the animation data for anything under the left clavicle will play in this pose. So anything outside of that won't play in this. And then next we're going to go and promote this to a variable. We're going to call this throwable blend weight. And we're going to drag this down out of the way. And now back in our event graph, what we're going to do is we're going to use those animation notifies to control this. So we'll add an animation notify event on throwable start. We want to set this to 1. That'll start blending in the throwable animations. And then we're going to add in the throwable's end event. And when we hit the end of that track, we want to set this to 0. And we'll compile that. Double check our animation graph. We need to go ahead and connect this and compile again. And now I think we can go ahead and test it out. All right, seems to be working. Now we need to go ahead and attach that component to our first person character. Sorry, to do that though, we need to first go into our skeleton for these for the arms. And if you don't have this open already, you can jump down to first person character, mesh, and then the skeleton here. We're going to find the left hand, which is here. We're going to right click and select add socket. We're going to change the name of that to throwable socket. And we're going to reposition that a little bit. We're going to focus in on that, select the socket again. We're going to move this out and away and kind of like in front of the palm. An important thing here though is you want to make sure that whatever your throwable is, when it spawns in at this location, you want to make sure it doesn't overlap with this mesh here. Otherwise, you know, when you go to throw it, it'll cause a collision event, and you want to avoid that if you can. I think this is good for now. We can go ahead and save that and test it out. We'll jump back into our character blueprint. Now what we want to do is we want to attach our throwable component to that socket. So we'll go ahead and call this in again. We'll do attach component to component. The other component we want to attach to is our mesh. And we want to attach at that throwable socket location. And we'll choose snap to target for all of these. And compile. Let's try that out again. Oh, so we don't detach our actor. We need to go back to our component and do that. You can, I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of floating out in the distance there. So in our component, when we throw, we want to go ahead and detach the actor before we start activating the movement component. So for our current throwable, we're going to call detach actor, attach from actor. We're going to plug this in here first. And we're going to do keep world for all of these. Now let's try that again. There we go. Now you'll see it overlaps our targets though, so that's something we're going to fix next. So to fix that, we're going to jump back into our parent class. We're going to go into the event graph here. And basically what's happening is because our targets are a pawn object type and we have our collision set to overlap only pawn, it's just going to overlap with them. So to fix that, we're going to call in a on end overlap node for our collider. And what we want to do is we want to set it up so that the first time we overlap with something that is a pawn, we can go ahead and switch over to a different collision type. However, we want to make sure we're overlapping with the right thing because there are multiple things that have that pawn object type. We're going to jump back into our first person character and find our capsule, because we want this to change once we leave this capsule area here. So we're going to jump down to the component tag section. We're going to add a new tag in here. We'll just call this first person capsule and compile. So now back in our throwable parent, for this we can check if our other component has that tag. And we'll use this to control a branch. So basically, if it does have that tag, what we want to do is we want to get our collider and we want to change its collision preset or collision profile name. We're going to change it to projectile. So now it'll block everything. However, this should only fire once, but to make absolutely sure that it only fires once, we're just going to add in a do once node right here and compile. So let's go ahead and try that out. There we go, now it's hitting our target. So now we're going to start building the functionality of this. For our movement, we want to call in whenever our movement stops moving, our projectile stops. And off of this, we're going to call our detonate function for our throwable. So we're going to go ahead and make a new function here, call it detonate. And we're going to call that whenever our projectile stops. Now, what is it we actually want our throwable to do when it detonates? For me, what I want it to do is kind of like capture enemies within a certain radius. So to do that, I'm going to call in our throwable collider. I'm going to change its collision response. Or sorry, I'm going to set collision response to all channels to be overlap. That way it overlaps with everything once we detonate it. And then one other thing that I wanted to do is actually spawn in some sort of particle effect. And that particle effect is going to change for each child class. So I'm going to make that a variable here. We'll call it impact effect. And we'll change the type to Niagara system. And make sure you choose Niagara system and not Niagara particle system. That's going to make a difference later. So after we detonate, we'll go ahead and spawn that in. We'll do a spawn system at location. And for the location, we'll use whatever location our throwable is at currently. So we'll do a get actor location. And we'll plug that in here and compile. Right, so I definitely skipped a step before we spawn this in. For our collider, I actually want to change the radius for this. We're going to do set sphere radius. And we can change this to a variable as well. Or this sphere radius here, we'll promote that to a variable and we'll call it effect range. So that way for each of our children classes, we can kind of determine how big we want this to expand to. And then make sure this update overlaps is checked. That'll make sure that as it gets bigger, it'll overlap with components and we can do something with that later. And then one more variable that I want to add in here that we'll set for our children classes. We're going to call this glow color. It's going to be the color that, you know, the shell glows for all our different children classes. We'll change this type to linear color. Compile, and we can set the default to just be a full white. And before we leave our parent, we're going to go into our construction script here. We're going to grab our throwable shell and the icon. And we're going to create some dynamic material instances for these. So we'll grab dynamic material instance. We'll plug that in here. And for the source material, it's going to be a material instance that I made for these. A throwable shell. And for this material instance, I have a parameter called glow color that we can set to whatever we want to. So we're going to do set parameter or set vector parameter value. We're just going to plug in this glow color variable here. We need to change the name to glow color. And we're going to do this again, but for our icon. So this time we'll plug this in as the target. Now we do need to change the source material to be our icon material instance. This is just going to be whatever material you have for this mesh. That's really all that matters here. Now we can test that out real quick in here. And we can change this glow color, just be something random. And you can see it's updating there. And then once we have an icon mesh in there, that'll update as well. So now with that done, I think we can start making our first child class from this throwable. We'll jump back into our content browser, to our blueprints folder. We'll right click and choose create child blueprint class. We'll call this one the love bomb. We'll open that up. First thing, we can change the icon mesh to be the heart icon for this. And if we zoom on that, you can see that there. And under our class defaults, we'll change the glow color to be some sort of pink color, something like that. And we can leave the effect range and the throw speed at the defaults. You can change it if you want to. I was just fine with leaving these as is. Then we'll change the Niagara system effect here to the effect that I made for the love bomb. And we'll compile that. Now we'll just test this out as is. We jump back into our throwable component, and in our throwable types array, we'll set this first one here to just be the love bomb by default. So it works. There's a couple things we need to change though. We need to rotate the throwable so that it looks correctly, and then we also need to get rid of the meshes that detonates. So first one, we'll jump back into our skeleton, and we just need to rotate this, I think by -90 degrees on the y-axis. Save that and try again. There we go. And now in our throwable parent, in our detonate function, what we want to do is we actually want to take our shell and set its visibility to false. And we want to make sure that we propagate that to children, so that'll automatically hide our icon mesh as well. I'll try that again. There we go. So now we want some way of getting a reference to whatever enemies we want to affect. So in our event graph, I'm just going to delete all these real quick. I'm going to get our throwable collider. I'm going to add a on component begin overlap node. And now we want some way of, filtering out the things we don't want. So in our third person character, I'm going to click up here. I'm going to search for tag again, but this time I'm going to use actor tags. I'm just going to add in an enemy tag and compile. Now in our love bomb, we can check if our other actor has that tag. And if it does, we can save that and use it for later. So to save it, we're going to make a new variable. We're going to call this affected actors. We're going to change the object type to an actor object. And we're actually going to make this an array. So now if it has that tag, we want to add that to our array here. But we don't want to add it more than once, so we'll just do add unique here. And for the input here, we want to get the current actor. So now that we have that, what we can do in here is we can override our detonate function. And we still want to call the parents version of the function, so we'll leave that in. But now what we want to do is we want to get our affected actors array, and then we'll call a for each loop on this. So we'll run this for every element that we have in here. And in this loop body, what we actually want to do is spawn those seeker actors in. So we need to go ahead and go make those real quick. So back in our content browser, create a new blueprint class. This one will just be actor. We'll call it a seeker. This is going to be pretty simple. We're going to add another sphere collision. We're going to call this seeker collider. And we'll override that as the root. And now we want to go ahead and add in a projectile movement to this as well. We'll call this seeker movement. Compile real quick. Now a couple important settings for a movement component here. We do want our rotation to follow velocity here. And we want to uncheck initial velocity and local space. Gravity will set to 0 because we don't want this to be affected by gravity. And then down here under homing, we'll do is homing projectile to true, and we'll set the magnitude to 200. And one more thing, we want to change these initial speed and max speed variables real quick, and we'll set those to 25 and 250. A lot of this is just, tweak it to change, how it feels, and change it to whatever you like, but this is just what I thought was best when I was messing with it. And one more component that we're going to add in here is a Niagara particle system. And we'll call this seeker particles. And that's part of the reason that we choose to follow velocity here for our rotation. So that way when I plug this in here, it's always going to be perpendicular to our x-axis, regardless of whichever way it's going. And one more thing in our movement component for the velocity, we're going to change this to be 1 on the z-axis, so there's initial burst of speed just going straight up whenever it spawns in. Now, one thing to note is when you do have a homing projectile, you need to set the component that you want it to home in onto, and we're going to get that information from our love bomb. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. You could set the homing component to just be the mesh from our third-person character, but when I did that, it was going like towards the bottom. I want it to target towards the head. So we're going to add in a new component here, parent it to that, and we're just going to call in a scene component because we don't want any sort of visualization to this or anything. We're just going to call it seeker target. And in our construction script, we can attach that to our character mesh at the head bone. And we'll choose snap to target for each of these. So now our seeker target component here is going to attach to the head of our character and follow it around everywhere. So now in our love bomb, for the array element here, we can cast this to a third-person character. And as our third-person character, we can get that seeker target. And we'll use that later. But after we cast this, what we want to do is we want to spawn in that seeker. We'll choose seeker as the class here. And for the transform, we can just use the actor transform of the love bomb. So I actually just realized something. I'm going to go back into our third-person character, and instead of using a scene component here, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to add in a sphere collision component here as well. And we'll call this seeker target. And we'll try and compile that. Go back to our construction script, pull this in here, and reattach that. And for the collision for this, I'm gonna clear all this out. I'm gonna set it to just overlap all dynamic, I think is fine. Now back in our love bomb, when we spawn this in, we can get the seeker that was just spawned in, and we can set, actually sorry, no, we want to get the seeker movement component, and then we'll set the homing target component for a movement component. And that is just going to be this seeker target right here. Plug that in. Try and keep this a little clean. So now what should happen is when we throw out our love bomb, it checks to see what actors with the tag are in the area, and then spawn in a seeker for each one, and those will all fly to their individual targets. Let's give it a shot. And there we go, but now it doesn't stop once it hits them. So back in our seeker blueprint, under the event graph, we can delete all of these. We'll grab our collider. We won't, get rid of that. We want to add a event for on component begin overlap. And what we want to do is we want to check if the overlapped component is the same as the target component for our movement component. We'll get our target. Get homing target. Yeah, there we go. Now, if these two are equal to each other, we want to go ahead and stop. We're going to create a new branch. And we're going to create a new function here called stop seeker, because I think we're going to do a couple things in here. So the first thing we want our stop seeker function to do is to get our movement and actually just deactivate it. And then one other thing that we wanted to do, this particle system is set to kind of loop indefinitely, but I set a parameter in it so that if we change a boolean in this system, it'll stop spawning. What we want to do is we actually want to get this. We want to set Niagara variable boolean. Yeah, so, and I just named the boolean to be should spawn. And we want that to be false. Now, hopefully when it hits its target, Well, we actually need to call the function, don't we? Now when it hits its target, it stops and stops spawning. And there we go. A little underwhelming though. So once it does hit its target though, what I want it to do is I want it to spawn this same system, but just at the target location. So we'll do spawn system at location, or spawn system attached. And the system that we want is the same as our particles, but you can really set this to whatever you want. We'll get the Niagara system asset, and we'll plug that in here. And we'll attach it to the movement homing target component. Or nope, sorry, wrong one. And we'll compile that, and now we'll try this again. So now you kind of have this effect. So now the next thing that we want to do here is actually make it look like our targets have been stunned. But we want to make our target character play a montage. And the cleanest way I think to do that, before we call the play montage node, I'm going to pull in the movement. I'm going to get that homing target component. And from this, what we're actually going to do is we're going to get the owner of this. So this will kind of go up the chain until it finds whatever actor is actually owning this component, which is going to be that third person character. So we'll cast this to a third person character. We'll drag this up here, plug this in, and then we will get the mesh from our third person. And we'll use this to play a montage. Call in a play montage node, plug this in here. And now we need to create a montage to actually play. So back in our content browser, I'm gonna go to the animations folder. We're gonna right click, create animation montage. We'll use the mannequin skeleton for this. And we'll just call this montage love struck. So in here, we will go ahead and grab the love struck animation. And that's really all we need in here. You'll see them sway back and forth like this, and that's really it. We'll save this, but we do need to go into our third person animation blueprint, which is here under mannequin animation blueprint. So now, like before, we just need to make sure that we are blending in that slot. But this one, we can just add it into this chain here. Default slot, default group, because this, affects the whole body. We'll go ahead and compile that. And I'll make sure in our montage we have this slot selected here. Now we can go back here, we'll test that out. Alright, we didn't actually, in our seeker, we didn't actually select that montage. So we'll compile that, and now we'll test it. There you go. Oh, something strange going on. So it's kind of playing infinitely and constantly spawning in things. So, and you know what's happening there is our collider here, it's constantly overlapping with the seeker target as it's playing that animation. So to fix that, we're just going to add in a do once node right before all of this. I think that's the simplest solution here. And one other thing, in our love struck montage, I do want this to loop. We'll change this to just loop. Let's try this again. And there we go, that's a little bit better. However, now it's doing that infinitely, and we can work on fixing that next. So I do want to add in a couple timers here. First one is going to be for the seeker. Right now, we can just kind of like seek infinitely. And I'm going to change that, and we're going to call in a begin play node. And when this begins, we're going to set a new timer by function name. And we can leave this blank. It'll default to this blueprint that we're in now. But the function name is going to be stop seeker. And you can set this time to whatever. I'm going to probably promote this to a variable and call it stop seeker timer duration. And I'm going to promote this to a variable as well and call this stop seeker timer. We'll compile that. I'll just set this to like 3 seconds. But now this will count down to, or from 3 seconds down to 0. When it hits 0, it'll call this function. Now in this function, I actually want to clear out the timer first thing. We'll grab this, do clear and invalidate timer by handle. So that way there's no chance that this timer, if we call this stop seeker function early, there's no chance of it being called again if that timer hits 0. This will just automatically clear it out. And now we're going to add in another timer to clear out this animation. And what we want to do is whenever we first play this montage, we're going to start another timer. So we'll do set timer by function name again. This time the function name, we're just going to call it clear love struck. So we'll go ahead and make a new function with that name. And compile. Now back in this, I think actually instead of doing set timer by function name, I am going to get rid of this. I'm going to do set timer by event. And we're just going to convert this to an event. We're going to drag this over here. We're going to connect this event to this node here. This time we'll just do 3 seconds here. You can promote this to a variable as well if you want to. I'm just going to leave it hard-coded. And basically when we call this event, we want to get the mesh that is playing this montage and tell it to stop. We'll grab this mesh here. We will get the animation instance from it. And we'll see if a montage is playing, or I think we can just call montage stop. And for the montage, we'll choose this love struck. We'll compile. Let's go ahead and test that out. Throw, it starts, then after 3 seconds, it stops. So it does snap in and out like that, so we'll change this to just something like 0.2. That'll make it a little smoother. And now we actually also want to stop that particle system that we spawned in over here. So we'll go ahead and promote this to a variable. Call this love struck effect. We'll connect these in. Now over here, we'll get that effect. And we'll set the Niagara variable again. We'll make sure we choose Boolean. Since this is the same effect as our seeker, it has all the same settings. We can just choose should spawn, set to false. We'll compile that, and now it should stop playing that effect as well. Perfect. So now with that done, one thing I want to add in is the ability to cook our throwables. So we're going to jump back into the parent, and under event graph in the begin play node, we're going to set another timer. We're going to do set timer by function name, and we're going to promote this to a variable, call it detonate timer. And the way I name my timers is typically I'm naming it after what it counts down to. So this one is counting down to the detonate function, so I call it detonate timer. And then we'll promote this to a variable as well, call it detonate timer duration. And this is just going to determine how long we can cook our throwables for before it detonates in our hand. We can compile that, and we'll set it to just, I don't know, 3 seconds, I guess, for now. And then back in our detonate function, before we do all of this, we want to go ahead and clear that timer. Do clear and invalidate. We'll drop this in here. So now if we hold our throwable in our hand, it should detonate right in our hands. And there you go. However, now we only want to throw it though, you know, if it still exists. So back in our throwable over here, we're going to get our current throwable, and we're going to convert this to a validated get. So that way this only fires if our throwable is valid. We'll compile that and let's try again. Oh, you know what's going on? It's still valid because we didn't actually destroy the actor. Over here, at the end of all of this, actually probably even before all of this, we only want this to fire, you know. No, we actually do want to do this at the end. We'll do destroy actor here and compile that. Now let's see what happens. Alright, but now there's no way to get out of this animation. Go back in our component. So if this is not valid, we're going to grab our character mesh. We're going to do something similar to before. We're going to get the animation instance. We're just going to tell it to stop playing a montage. And we'll set this to something like 0.2. And the montage that we want it to stop is the throwable montage. And there we go. Alright, so that I think does it for the love bomb. So now we can make a couple different variants of this. So we'll go back to our blueprints folder. We'll right click on this, we'll create another child blueprint. And we'll work on making just a stereotypical explosive grenade. So in here, we're gonna mess with some of the variables here. For our icon, I have an explosive icon mesh that we'll plug in here. And under class defaults, I'll leave the throw speed and effect range the same. Same for these as well. But for the color, I'll make it some kind of like reddish orange. And for the impact effect, I have another Niagara system for the explosion. So now we can jump back to our component real quick. We're going to set that to be the default for now. We'll see. There we go. Now when it detonates, we're going to override what we want it to do. We'll delete all of this. We're going to override that detonate function. And we're also going to add in a component up here. We're going to look for a radial force. Yeah. We're just going to call this explosive. And we're going to work on the settings over here. I'm going to change the setting here for the fall off to be linear. If it's constant, it has the same effect in the entire range. But I want it to just kind of drop off the further away you get from the origin. And then also in our construction script, we're going to pull this in here. We're going to set the radius of this to be the effect range of our blueprint here. So that way it matches whatever we want the range of this throwable to be. So since we only want this explosive force to fire once, what really matters for us is this impulse strength. I'm going to set that to something like 100,000. It needs to be pretty high to get some sort of meaningful effect. But you can obviously change that to whatever you want. Compile that, and then in the detonate, what we want to do is we want to get this component, and we want to tell it to fire that impulse. Now let's go ahead and test that out. Oh, so we're calling our destroy actor too early in our parent blueprint. Because it's trying to do all of that, but it's destroying itself before it can even get to it. Let's see, back to our parent. So for this, so I think what we'll do is we'll just handle this destroy actor in each child blueprint. So we'll jump back into our love bomb. Where are you? Yeah. So at the end of this detonate function, we'll just add in a destroy actor node here. And then same thing for this, do a destroy actor. There might be a better way to do this. I think you could probably call a new function or event at the end of this throwable parent. At the end of this detonate function, you could call a new event over here that then calls a destroy actor. Depends on how you want to do this. Since this is not very complicated, I'm just gonna put a destroy actor node at the end of each function here. Let's try that again. There we go. So now we're actually getting that explosive force. So I think that does it for the explosive. Obviously you can build on this as much as you want to. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to make the final variant for this. It's going to be a lightning variant. We'll just call it throwable lightning. And we'll jump into this blueprint. We'll focus in on that for the icon. Again, I have another icon mesh for this called lightning icon, and we'll change those class defaults. I have another impact effect for this with lightning, and then we'll change the color to like some sort of blue. And everything else we can leave as default. Now for this, we're going to do something similar with our love bomb, where we want this to only affect certain actors. So I'm going to jump back over to that. I'm going to get the logic from our event graph here. I'm just going to copy and paste this. And this is typically a red flag encoding, you know, whenever you're copy and pasting a chunk of code from one class to another. So I probably could make a new, you know, a new child class called targeted or something like that, and then have this logic in there. So that way, and then I could make the love bomb and the lightning kind of child blueprints of that. So that way it would have that logic by default. Again, since I'm only making 3, I'm not going to worry about it, but just, you know, keep that in mind for your projects. We'll jump back over to the lightning. We'll copy and paste this in. We are going to need to make an affected actors variable here. And again, we'll make this an actor object type. And we'll make this array. We'll compile that, and there we go. Now when we detonate, let me get rid of these real quick. We'll call in that detonate function. For each of those, we'll spawn a lightning system to that actor. So again, gonna jump back into our throwable, or our love bomb, and the detonate function here. Actually, I think we can reuse just about all of this, which again is why we probably should just put this in a parent class, but for now I'm just gonna copy this. I'll figure out those when we get back into the lightning. Because instead of spawning an actor at each of these, I'm going to spawn in a system. So spawn system at location. Drag this down here. We'll use this again, actually. We'll get the location for this, or we can just right click get actor location. I don't want the rotation or the scale. And for this template here, this can be our impact effect variable. So now for the system that I made, I set it up so that the lightning chain starts at its origin and then goes to some relative location from the origin. But we're gonna work on getting that now. I don't want this. Yeah, I want to get the secret target component. I want to just use that location. So we're gonna get the actor location again of our current actor. And we're gonna get the world location of this component here. We're gonna subtract these to get the relative location. So now for this system, it has a parameter. So we're gonna set Niagara, I think it was a vector, or sorry, set Niagara variable. We're gonna choose the vector type. And I think we can do vector 3. And the variable name for that was end location. We'll plug that in here. And then after we spawn all those in, we'll go and destroy the actor. Now back in our component, I'm going to set that to be the default for now. And we'll try it out. And it did not work. I'm going to double check my system real quick, and I can kind of show you what I mean, what I'm talking about while I'm in here as well. So there's a user parameter here set to end location. And if I adjust this, you'll be able to see this change in here. So if I make this like 1,000, it goes straight up to that point, 1,000 units up. But for default, I just have it set to 10, so that way it's just kind of like this little ball. But I need to figure out why that's not updating. Okay, so this is the wrong node to use here. What I actually wanted to do was set the vector parameter. There we go. That's right. Again, we'll change that to end location. We'll plug this in here and then destroy the actor. Oh, we didn't actually connect this together. Oh, well, duh. There we go. Oh, you know what? I just realized we want this destroy actor to be called at the end of that loop. Let me double check that that's right in the love bomb as well. Interesting. So I'm gonna move this down here. We want this, whole loop to go through before we destroy the actor. So try this out, and there we go. Now it's working correctly. However, once they get electrocuted, they don't do anything, so we can fix that real quick. We're gonna move this up out of the way. If I have the third person character right here, I'm just gonna clear this up. I'm gonna add a reroute node here. And then since this has our third person character, we can just get the mesh from that. And with this mesh, we can call a set all bodies below simulate physics. Oh, nope, wrong one. We'll drag this up over here, call this in, make the new simulate true, and we'll uncheck include self. And we do need to have a bone name apparently. Compile that, and for the bone name, we'll just set it to root because we want all of the bones to simulate. And then one other thing we need to do here is we need to change the collision of this to just be ragdoll. And we'll uncheck update overlaps, plug this in here, reroute this, reroute this, and there we go. Let's try that out. And there you have it. So now that we have all these 3 different options, I want some way of cycling through them. So back in our throwable, I'm going to create another event and call it change throwable type, or need to add the event first. We'll call this change throwable type. And we're going to have a Boolean input on this. Call it is increasing. This will hopefully make sense in a second. So we're going to have this drive a branch. And we're also going to make a new variable over here called current selection. We're going to change the type to an integer. And compile that. So now if we are trying to increase this integer, we're going to call this in, we're going to get that, and we're going to type plus plus to get that increment integer node. And if it's decreasing, we're just going to type in minus minus to get that decrement. However, after we do this, we want to make sure that we're not going outside of the bounds of this, because this integer here is going to tell us which index to use in our array. So we want to make sure that it's in the correct bounds. So for that, we're going to get this, we're going to clamp. The minimum will be 0, and the maximum will be the length of this subtracted by 1. And we'll just go ahead and set this one more time with this. So that way, if either of these try to go outside of those bounds, this will automatically clamp it back down to within bounds. And up here in our array, we can go ahead and get this and plug that in there. Now we need some way of actually calling that change throwable type event here. So back in our first person character, in our event graph, we're going to add a couple new inputs here. I'm just going to use the mouse wheel going up and down. And basically when the mouse wheel up is pressed, I want to get our throwable component. I want to call it change throwable type that is increasing to true. And then on mouse wheel down, do that again, but this time just with is increasing to false. We'll compile that. Oh, whoops. Now we'll compile that. And then back in our throwable, we want to expand this so that it actually has all the different options. So we'll add a couple elements here, and we'll choose the explosive and the love bomb. We'll go ahead and play that. So the first thing we have is the lightning. If we scroll up, we go over to the explosive. And if we scroll up again, we go to the love bomb. And if you scroll down, you can go back to all the different options here. So I think that covers everything for this tutorial. I've been messing around with it. I haven't noticed any bugs or anything. Other than, this can still go after these guys, but you can like add a tag to them if they're dead or something like that. And then kind of use that to determine whether or not you actually go after them. So I believe that covers everything. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please do like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have any questions or feedback, please do let me know in the comments below. Also, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'll leave links to those in the description. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon, and I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.